Thanks very much. Thanks very much for inviting me. I work in a research unit at the University of Kent which focuses on social care. And in the last 20 or so years I've become much more interested in the housing dimension. A lot of the research I've been involved in is on specialised housing for older people, but I hope and my presentation will give you a bit of a flavour of some of the work we've done on that, but I hope that it also illustrates the incredible importance of ordinary housing. I think the statistics that I show as part of this will bear that out. Quick disclaimer, because my research work is funded by the NIHR, they always bear down on us if we don't say that what we talk about is our own opinions, not theirs. So, our focus at PSRU has mainly been on services for older people, but I think it's really important to think about the life course and people's housing needs over time. So, although I'm focusing on the core work of the unit, I recognise very much that housing isn't something that you can compartmentalise. What we do have is a very large population of older people, and the vast majority are in private households. Very small proportion are in care homes, and that's actually declined over the last 10 years. Retirement housing itself is part of that 97.3%, but there's not an awful lot of it, and what are now becoming called integrated retirement communities with care and support as well as the housing element are even less. But then when you turn to ordinary housing, there's still a lot of non-decent housing, particularly in the private rented sector, and as we know, the private rented sector has become increasingly important across the age range in recent years. So that's a real issue for everybody. And in addition, the dreadful nature of ordinary housing in terms of accessibility for people with any physical or psychological difficulties, just really needs a lot of work to improve. So, specialised housing, I'm going to call it extra care housing because that's what it's been called for a while. I don't know how familiar people are with the concept of extra care housing, but essentially it's a supported housing development with care and support available to residents, with communal facilities, with meals facilities, and basically giving people a housing kind of option rather than the care home option. So people have their own front door, they have security of tenure, and it's housing with care, not traditional care homes. But it's still quite a thing that's not that well understood across the board. Our PSRU studies of extra care housing that I've been involved in, that's just the main ones in recent years. We were funded in almost 20 years ago to undertake a study of schemes funded by the Department of Health's Extra Care Housing Fund, and that really kick-started my interest in housing in the academic world. But I've also collaborated with colleagues in various universities and with the Housing Learning and Improvement Network, Jeremy Porteous. I don't know if people know Jeremy. He leads the Housing Lin. So we've been very much working with people who are embedded in the housing world as well as the academic side. my research work and with colleagues and other research by university colleagues across the piece has looked at a number of issues around housing and care. Certainly the general picture is that people in housing with care are on average more dependent than people living in mainstream housing, rather less dependent than people living in care homes. There's been quite a lot of interest, particularly from the Department of Health and Social Care and councils, in moving away from care homes, moving to a housing option like extra care. And there's still an issue really that people in the housing sector are not so dependent, and particularly people living with dementia. Care homes are very much focused on supporting people with dementia these days. Housing options do sometimes offer support for people with dementia, but there are quite a number of issues around the relationship between residents who are more ill and less ill, and there are issues around the design of housing to sort of accommodate people and support people, keep them safe and so on, and those haven't been resolved. One of the other issues is, everybody is very familiar with the financial pressures on councils, and that has led to a certain amount of concentration on sort of a narrowing of care and support in some of these schemes, so that the kind of broad supportive arrangements have perhaps become more tramlined and less personalised. Is sometimes called time and task, where support workers deal with a particular issue for a resident, then move on to another resident, rather than have the more general social support. And that has implications for the relationships between residents. If the people who are receiving services are getting a very tramline sort of service, then other residents who are not needing that might look at the place and think, well, is this place for me anymore? Is it becoming more like a care home? So there are quite a lot of issues that happen there. And one of the other things that is still an issue for a lot of the work in these sorts of developments is there's not an awful lot of facilities for people from particular minority groups. There are developments which specialise in providing the kinds of facilities people in different groups require for their cultural needs and so on, but there's not very much going on there. So that's a development that really needs to be pushed forward. On the positive side, a number of research projects have indicated that moving to a supportive housing development like extra care can help to reduce the care needs for residents, leading to hopefully fewer hospital admissions and enable people to age in place rather than sort of move on, and with the advantage of achieving cost savings as well, which is obviously a very important issue. So there are positive outcomes, and we've done a number of pieces of work as well, looking at matched groups of people and determining that the outcomes for people in extra care supported housing can be better than for people in care homes or for people living in ordinary housing. So there's some definite positives there. To summarise, some research work has indicated that people do have positive preferences for the kind of supported housing rather than traditional retirement arrangements in care homes. But as I say, there's still an awareness issue, and people have been thinking about all sorts of different names. IRCs are the current flavour of the month, but whether that continues or not, or whether it's replaced by some other name in the future, who knows. But there's not much of it. The Mayhew review that was conducted last year, which received quite a lot of publicity, was recommending an increase from an average of 7,000 retirement, that's extra care and all retirement housing, from 7,000 a year to 50,000 a year. And I can't detect in that report or any of the other reports which are talking about extra developments how on earth that's going to be achieved. So it would be great if it was going to happen, but there's still a big question mark there. There's also the issue of, as I say, the financial pressures on councils and supporting residents, which are creating sort of narrower service arrangements with residents and sort of more instrumental arrangements, time and task and so on. And also, as I mentioned, these kinds of schemes have a variety of services, facilities for communal activity and so on, and there's quite a lot of pressure on those. One of the possibilities is if you develop some scheme like this in a reasonably central area, then you can make use of the local facilities, and that has advantages perhaps of people having engagement with the local community rather than being perhaps cut off. One of the issues that some of these schemes are sometimes criticised for is that they're rather sort of gated and people sort of are locked in, not literally, but not really engaging with the community. So there's a balance there. But also the providers are focusing perhaps more on the lifestyle, silver surfers kind of world rather than people needing care and support. So that's something that's a continuing issue for this very tiny bit. So moving on to mainstream housing, just to finish off, as we know, most housing has already been built. There's a lot of work going on in adapting and modernising existing buildings through disabled facilities grants and so on. And there's quite a lot of research work on people's preferences. I think it would be a good thing to do to sort of try and bring the vast amount of literature that's out there. I've got a stack of it online and in my office of people's preferences. But what I would come down to at the end is that our research, as I say, focuses on people who need help, care and support. And there's a lot of rhetoric in government publications about the importance of housing. But I'm not yet convinced that that's being translated from rhetoric about housing to actually making housing the centre for people's lives. I think the thinking in government departments is still that social care and housing are kind of a bit separate. And although I welcome the Older People's Housing Task Force, and I know some of the people who are on it, I still think that some of the publicity for that is kind of saying, well, it's all about supporting people in sort of late stage of life who need social care, rather than thinking about that life course and how people might move through different kinds of accommodation to suit them at different points in their lives, not just sort of focusing on that sort of social care element. So I'm keen, as I say, to move away from just focusing on a very narrow part of housing to the fact that the vast majority of people do live in mainstream housing. And these are the kind of things that I'm becoming more and more interested in over time. So I hope one way or another I can work with colleagues in sort of bringing a perspective of work on the needs and support of older people, but recognising that's not something that's just, you know, a separate thing from the life course of everybody. So.